No Olympic sport is easy to do, and that's a fact. Olympic sports require a high level of physical, technical, and mental strength. All Olympic athletes should be admired and praised, regardless of whether they win their category sport. Participating in any Olympic sport requires hard work, dedication, and perseverance. In this video, we will discuss some of the hardest Olympic sports to do. So let's talk about the hardest Olympic sports to do, starting with the easiest and going up with increasing difficulty. The first is gymnastics. Gymnastics is a sport that involves the execution of exercises that require strength, flexibility, balance, and control. People sometimes underestimate the effort gymnasts put into anything they do because they only see the final result after it's been mastered and believe that's all there is to it. Gymnasts must work extremely hard and endure great agony to perform those incredible performances. According to Dr. Kathleen Davenport, there is a significant level of danger with the elements. Gymnasts are expected to master balance, strength, flexibility, and endurance of both upper and lower limbs to attain Olympic-level brilliance. She is the director of physiatry at HSS Florida and a dancer specialist. Flexibility, mobility, and high strength are required in gymnasts. They must be able to exercise strict body control, and that takes a lot of practice. The dread of failing is one psychological factor that can ruin a gymnast. Given the types of motions required by gymnastics, hesitating when a gymnast is afraid of falling may be disastrous. Next is swimming. Swimming can be classified as a team sport or a solitary activity. Swimming competitions, including freestyle, backstroke, breaststroke, and butterfly events, are among the most popular Olympic sports. One of the most difficult sports is swimming. I'm not talking about splashing around in the pool, but about true competition swimming, where you have to make every second in the water matter, because if you screw up in a race or don't perform to your full potential, you will lose. In every sport, there will always be someone stronger and quicker, but in swimming, it's believed that 90% of success is determined by your mental toughness and 10% by your physical fitness. The number of breaths you take during a race might mean the difference between winning and losing. Swimmers must possess exceptional strength, stamina, skill, and mental toughness. Many Olympic contestants practice losing by hundredths of a second their entire lives. It isn't easy. Every muscle in a swimmer's body is in use at all times, and they are also holding their breath on top of all that. It requires tremendous mental fortitude. I admire everyone who competes in the Olympics, including those who advance to the trials. Since we're talking about the hardest Olympic sports, horseback riding is the next. One of the hardest Olympic sports an athlete can do is horseback riding, sometimes known as equestrian. It is not only physically difficult, but also quite psychologically taxing. Building a relationship with your horse requires dedication, effort, patience, and most importantly, commitment. You will only have a wonderful experience if you have a good relationship with your horse. It is important to spend time with your horse, both when riding and not. It would help if you learn to work with your horse rather than against it. It is a two-person team sport. One of the most liberating experiences a person can have is being at the top of their game when everything comes together and you accomplish a certain level of accomplishment. This sport is the sole flight method if you desire to fly unaided by a manufactured device. This sport includes eventing, an Olympic discipline, hunter jumpers, barrel racing, western pleasure, hunt seat, reining, showmanship, saddle seat, driving, endurance, vaulting, polo, racing, and other disciplines. It's a wonderful sport, but it's also really challenging. To achieve this, it takes so much more than just your labor, blood, and tears. Riders dedicate their lives to riding horses, not just their time and energy. Even though some would disagree, some could say that riding isn't a sport, but without trying it, you can't know how challenging it can be. Maintaining balance in the saddle requires unbelievable muscle strength. Imagine trying to do anything else. Your horse will suffer if you don't consistently keep your emotions in check. Your horse can detect if you are even the least bit uneasy, which might cause the entire course of your ride to shift. Horseback riding is much more difficult than it appears, but it is also quite gratifying. Ice hockey is another hard Olympic sport. Physicality, technique, speed, and endurance, all important in this sport. Even with the replacements, 60 minutes of sprinting around the rink chasing a little puck with large sticks is a lot of work. Yet for ice hockey, endurance is important. The toughness, strength, and agility required as players struggle with one another on the ice, swirling about and changing direction rapidly and repeatedly, are readily apparent in the Olympics. And even for skaters, these guys move quickly. However, when the entire game is considered, hockey players' skill levels earn them high marks in one of the hardest Olympic sports. Field hockey players are aware that dribbling with a stick and a ball while skating is extraordinary because it is difficult enough to perform when walking. One of the most difficult sports is ice hockey. Next on the list of the hardest Olympic sports is figure skating. Figure skating is an ice-based sport where individuals, couples, or groups compete. It debuted in the Olympics in 1908 as the inaugural winter sport. Even though it appears simple, only some have the strength to jump and land. The four Olympic sports are men's and women's singles skating, pair skating, and ice dancing. Even though it calls for grace, it's challenging since you also need amazing technical skills. Jumps are judged down to the last littlest detail, including takeoff, entry, a position as you left the ice, in the air, revolutions, landing, speed, and height. You must also look stunning as your leg must support 5 to 8 times your body weight. To be a figure skater, you must practice considerably earlier than in other sports to be skilled in many different areas. A gymnast's suppleness, a dancer's elegance, and a runner's endurance are necessary for figure skating. One of the hardest Olympic sports should be this one, since it is underappreciated. It isn't easy to perfect this sport. This sport is difficult because of the poor self-esteem, the painful mishaps, and the bizarre operation concept. Your entire career may be altered by one bad jump. Also, the incredibly demanding aesthetic performance of figure skating requires technical proficiency and, of course, endurance. Because you must coordinate your movements with your partner, pair skating is much more challenging. The mental demands of figure skating are also quite high, and the sport is highly severe. Since it is only possible to truly appreciate how difficult figure skating is if you've practiced it yourself, the sport is vastly underappreciated. Then we have rowing. Rowing is a challenging and complicated sport. Rowing requires stability, rhythm, and attention to your surroundings. You cannot simply jump in the boat and move your oars back and forth. Being in the water on a bad day is difficult enough, let alone trying to row in a shell. So learning all the skills necessary to row is difficult. While playing the sport on the water is challenging, you must also understand things like your port and starboard oars and how to maintain these pricey boats properly. Being constrained by a narrow area might make things worse. It's all high intensity and must demand incredible speed and stamina. Because the last minutes of rowing are predominantly anaerobic, athletes frequently collapse at the finish line. As a result of the body overflowing with lactic acid, which is turned into ammonia and causes severe headaches in athletes, cells cannot breathe enough oxygen and become oxygen-starved. By balancing the anaerobic and aerobic energy systems while performing a repeating fine motor skill over 2,000 meters, rowing challenges your body to the maximum. When timing and precision are considered, it becomes more challenging for larger boats like an 8. Finally, the most physically and psychologically demanding Olympic sport on the list is water polo. The most challenging sport is water polo, based on 6 factors: strength, endurance, speed, agility, skill, and physicality. Bleacher Report dubbed it the toughest sport in the world in 2016. Water polo is just insane. The quantity of treading the participants must perform is mind-boggling, and the brutality in the water makes this sport the toughest. You must play the entire game in the water, and the opposing teams will physically assault you when you're above and below the surface. You must be powerful since the game is always moving. Water polo is one of the hardest Olympic sports. Work is not the only thing you need to do to avoid drowning. You also need to make an effort to stay awake as others attempt to do the same. It would be best to study a lot since it is highly tactical. Some Olympians compare the sport of water polo to a 7-foot-deep version of rugby and soccer. Water polo requires you to move while treading water to score, which is quite challenging. Nandini Collins told Insider that in addition to swimming up to a mile every game and treading water for 30 minutes, competitors sneak in blows to one another. Players in this sport attempt to avoid touching the ground, avoid drowning, and score points while resembling those in ice hockey and soccer. She is a trainer and fitness physiologist at Noom. Water polo is played with more violence than viewers realize, and it is played with wild abandon. That's a wrap, guys. The hardest Olympic sports have been highlighted. Do you have any suggestions for difficult Olympic sports that should be added to this list? Please leave your thoughts in the section below and follow us on YouTube for similar news. Thanks for watching.